Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Sandeep Pote and today I'm going to talk about managing the pods in Kubernetes. So in this video, I'm going to show how to create the pods in a Kubernetes cluster. And once the pods are created, how to view those pods, how to see the details of the pod, um, and how to create a pod within a default namespace or if you have any custom namespace. After that, I'll show how to delete the pods. So, as you know, pods are a smallest unit in the Kubernetes cluster. Again, it's a resource in a Kubernetes. Um, a pod can contain um, um, a container. Maybe it's a single container or a multiple containers. Although it is recommended to have only one container in a given pod, but you can create multiple containers if there is such requirements. For example, if you have a web application which sits in one container in a pod, and there's a supporting application, there's a logging application required to log any activities happening in the web application. So you can have that logging application or a container in a pod, in the same pod where your web application is, web application container within that pod. Um, so when creating a pod, the pod goes through a certain life cycle. So when pod creation um, command is executed or initiated, um, it goes through the workflow where it's scheduled to create the pod, and then once it is scheduled, it goes into the pending state. So there is a pod status, and to move to the next status, it should go through the certain pod conditions. Yeah. So first things first, for the pod to go into the pending state, it should be scheduled. Once it goes to the pending state, it then initializes the pod. Um, so that condition is checked. If it is initialized, then it goes into the container creating mode. Once the containers are created, then the conditions are checked whether the containers are ready to serve. And once it is ready to serve, the pod status is changed to running, and the condition is set to ready. So basically, a pod contains a container, and when the container is ready to serve the request, it is set to a ready state. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a single pod can have multiple containers. So, in when the pod is ready, it will show how many containers within a pod are ready to serve. So, if there are two containers, it will say that out of total two containers, um, both the containers are ready to serve the request. So that we'll see in the demo. Yeah. So um, so uh, while creating a pod, we have to provide the API version. So as of this recording, the current version for creating a pod is V1. So when we are creating a pod using declarative way, that is using the YAML file, we specify the API version as V1. Pods can be created using imperative way and a declarative way. Imperative way is where we create a pod using the commands, um, but sometimes it's not feasible to create a pod using a command, because if there are many options that needs to be provided, the declarative way is can be used instead of the imperative way to create the pods. And at times in the future, you might have like hundreds of pods. um, uh, Managing the details or the metadata of that pod becomes difficult using command line. So over the time, you have to start using the YAML file where you specify or you mention the specification about the pod, like how many containers, which application should be within that container, what post needs to be exposed, etc. So all this can be done either imperative way, that is through command line, or a declarative way, that is through YAML file. So I'll quickly jump to the demo. I'll start showing how to create a pod first within a default namespace, or within your custom namespace. Um, so before so if you are trying to create the pod, there's a prerequisite. um, you In the development environment you might need to have if you have set up your own environment, you have to you need to have a mini cube which supports and create and the orchestration of the Kubernetes resources. um, yeah, so let's jump into the demo. So I have this virtual machine where I have installed Linux Ubuntu operating system, and I have already installed Minikube. So let's quickly check the Minikube status. So if you want to know how to install the Minikube, um, there is a um, good resource available online. So you can refer those, and I'll also share this the URL in this video. So yeah, so the Minikube is running, and let's quickly check um, uh, pods that we have in the current cluster. Yeah. So first thing first, you can also check the cluster info, which cluster we'll be using. So the current cluster is running on this uh, URL, and um, so um, so creating the pods. So any resources that we need to create in a Kubernetes cluster, we have to use this kubectl command. So this will help in creating if you want to see uh, the details about the pod or any other resources, um, we need to use the kubectl command. Yeah. So first things first, let's quickly check how many pods we have in our in our cluster. So kubectl is the first, um, as I said, the command that we need to provide. And to check the pods, so we want to provide get pods command. So kubectl get pods, and this will show if there are any pods within the cluster. So we can see there is one pod, which is nginx pod yml, um, and the status is running, and it contains one container. It has one container, and it's in a running state. Yeah, and yeah, it's been created 6 hours ago. So I'll just quickly um, delete this pod, um, so that I can show things from the scratch. So all right, so this is deleted. Okay, so now if you see how many pods, we don't have any pods in there, and if you see that there are no resources found in the default namespace. So currently we are working on the default namespace. All right, you can create your own custom namespace. So namespace are used to segregate the pods um, in different group. So if you may have like a namespace staging or a production or a development, etc., and you can have your resources sitting in that namespace. Okay, so let's start by creating uh, pod first. So what I'll do is I'll create a um, pod with having a container, uh, having an nginx container. So the command for it is to kubectl run. So we are providing the run command, and we give the name of the pod. So say nginx pod, yeah, and the image that will be used to um, create a pod. Now this image will be pulled from the Docker Hub. All right. So kubectl run command, the pod name and the image of the pod. So this is the basic information that we need to, or the attributes that we need to provide to for creating a pod. All right. Now currently we are creating a pod using an imperative way, that's using through command line. I will also show later how to create a pods using declarative way, that is using the YML. So yeah, so the pod is created, and there should be one container with the name nginx within that pod. So the pod is created now. Now we want to see um, uh, how many pods are created. Now currently we have created one that we know, and if and we want to see details about that pod. Yeah. So first to see again how many pods. So use this command kubectl get pods. So it will list out the pod that was created. So this is the pod name that we provided, and the image that we can see it in the details what image is used to create this pod, and it is in running state now. It was created 30 seconds ago, and the container is up and running. So this is basically going um, through the workflow that we that I showed you earlier. Now, if you want to see the details of the pod, so you have to use the kubectl describe command. Um, Describe the pod and the pod name. Yeah, so kubectl describe the pod and what is the pod name. So now this will show um, when the pod was created, what is the name, what is the which namespace it's in. The pod is created, any labels that was created to identify the pods. Yeah, and how many containers are in the pod. So currently we can see only there is one container, that is the nginx pod. So it gave the same name of the container that of what we have for the pod. The image that is used and where the image is pulled from. Yeah, it's pulling from the Docker Hub, and the current state is running that we saw earlier, and it also records some events like if there were any errors, it would have shown in the events, but here we see the pod was created successfully without any errors. So we saw how to create a pod imperative way, how to see the details about the pod. Um, Now, and that was created in a default namespace. Yeah. Now, if you want to have a pod created in a separate namespace, you have to create a namespace first. So let's see the command to check how many namespaces we have currently. So again, uh, the way we see the pods, list of pods, we can see the list of namespace. So kubectl get namespaces. So you can see we have a default namespace that was created as a part of the installation we did for the Kubernetes, and there is a development that I created earlier, and these are all other system built-in namespaces. So let's create a new namespace. So it's the command for creating a new namespace is kubectl create um, namespace um, and the namespace name. So in this case, maybe I'll just give the names as production. So to create a namespace, the command is kubectl create namespace and the namespace name. All right. So this created a production namespace now. Let's see again the list of um, namespaces that we have. So here we see the production namespace that was created 11 seconds ago. All right. Now, so first things first, before we create a pod within the namespace, let's see how to see a pod in a given namespace. So use the kubectl get pods command that we used earlier. If we don't provide the namespace name, it will display the pods that are within the default namespace. Yeah. So here we saw that earlier that in the default namespace that we created the pod, nginx pod is sitting there. Now, if you want to see a pod within a specific namespace, uh, so provide the dash n and the namespace name. So we created a production namespace earlier. So now we want to see if there are any pods within that namespace. It won't because we haven't created any, but yeah. So if you see, there are no resources found in the production namespace. Yeah. So if you want to see the resources within a namespace, um, use the kubectl get. Uh, in this case, it's pods. if there are any other resources like replica set or deployment, etc., um, you can see with the dash n command and provide the namespace name, and it will list out all the resources that are available within that, or the specific resources that are available within that namespace. Now, since we don't have any um, pods within the production namespace, let's create it. So kubectl run the same command that we have used earlier for creating a pod. This in this case, I'll give a name nginx prod. Yep, this is the name, and we'll use the same image uh, nginx. Yeah, and in this case, now we are going to say that it should create this pod in this specific namespace. So the nginx prod pod will be created in the production namespace, which has the image nginx. So here we go. So um, the pod is created, and now let's see if the pod was created in the production. So earlier we saw that in the production namespace there wasn't any pods, and now if you see in that production namespace we have nginx prod. Yeah. So if I remove this um, namespace, you should be able to see in the default namespace there's nginx pod created, and in the production namespace is nginx pod created. Right. Now, again, let's see more details about um, the nginx prod pod, yeah, which is in the namespace production. Yeah. So if you see here, the namespace is production now, it's not default. Yeah. So you can segregate the pods where, I mean, which namespace it needs to sit. So rest of the things are same. The events that are managed or the recorded, and the images, the containers that particular pod has um, in this case. Yeah. So currently we saw how to create a pod in default or in a custom namespace, and how to see the details in of the pod, and how to create a namespace. All right. Um, so next, um, we'll see how to create a pod in a declarative way, that is using the YML. Now, as I said earlier, uh, declarative way of creating any Kubernetes resources is useful when you have like hundreds of resources in your cluster. So it will be difficult to manage or remember things using the imperative way, that is through the command line. So um, to create a pod using declarative way, we have to create a YML file. So either you can use a VI editor, or you can also use a Visual Studio Code. I have installed the Visual Studio Code on this machine, and I've installed an extension, YML extension, which will support in creating um, the Kubernetes resources or the syntaxes that are required to create the resources. Yeah. So let's create um, a YML file first. So I'm giving a name pod definition.yml. All right. So first thing first, we have to provide an API version that will be used to create this pod. Yeah. So earlier we saw in the presentation that the API version that is used is v1. So we'll have to provide that API version. Yeah. So API version. So if you see it so it will be v1. Yeah. So for first things first that we need to define here is what version of the API it's going to it's going to use. Second thing is what type of resource we are going to create. So we want to create a pod. So the, we have to use kind. or the type of the resource that we want to use, and that's a pod. Yeah, so it's showing uh, the pod that we can use, the pod templates or pod security, but in this case we are creating the pod. Now we have to also define the metadata, and the metadata is nothing but what will be the name of the resource. Yeah, so or any identification, so that comes under the label. So in this case we are creating a nginx pod using YML. So I'm just giving that name so that we can separate out, how the pods that we created earlier using imperative way. So the name of the pod that will be created is nginx pod YML, and you can also use labels. Yeah, so to identify um, the pod. So if there are like 50 odd pods and you want to apply certain um, um, specification for specific pods, then in that case you can use the labels. So say for example, this particular app is a backend app, so you can use the selectors to apply those specification. Yeah, but for now we won't use this. So I just wanted to mention that, what will be the name of the pod. Now um, we have to provide the specification, like what will this pod, what containers will this pod have. So it goes under the specific section, spec section, and we have to mention the containers that this pod will have. So if you see within the spec, we have containers. That's a list or array, and that's why we have that dash coming here. And now it's asking the name of the container. So say I'll give a name as nginx container YML, using YML. Yeah, and um, the image that will be used to create this pod, or what image should this container be created from of. Uh, this image will be again pulled from the Docker Hub. Now this is the basic specification, or the YML file uh, needs to be created for creating a pod. Now if you see, the imperative way was quick enough, like one single command and it created the pod. But with the declarative way, we have to provide all those details, API version, kind, metadata, etc. But this is very basic pod that we are creating. If further, if you want to extend or put more specification, the ports that will be used, the registered policy, the replica set, or the deployment, or how many replicas you want uh, of this pod, etc. So all the specification are easy to maintain or manage in this YAML file. Yeah. So I think, yeah. So for creating a simple pod, this is it should be enough. So we go back to our mm, command line. Um, let's see that file. So this file is in this location, pod definition.yml. So to create a pod or any resource using a declarative way, we have to use kubectl create command and specify a file from where we want to create a pod. So kubectl create dash f, the file name, and the file name, the pod definition node. This will read from this file what type of resource that needs to be created, and what are the specification, and what name which should be given to this resource, and which version um, it should use to create the resource. Yeah. So that's it. So the pod is created now. Yeah. Now this is again created in a default namespace. So let's quickly check if the pod was created, and in the default, yes. So nginx pod YML, that was created and it's running in 10 seconds ago. So this was all about creating a simple pod in a Kubernetes cluster. Um, uh, so next I'll show quickly on how to delete the pod. So you have to use kubectl delete command. on what we want to delete the pod and which pod we want to delete. So let's delete one of the pods, let's say Nginx pod. All right. So kubectl delete pod and the pod name. Now, since we are not giving the namespace, it will delete. It will try and search in the default namespace, and it will delete from the default namespace. Yeah. So it's deleted. So let's go back and see the pod. So now currently it has only one pod. Earlier there were two pods. All right. So if we want to delete a pod from a custom namespace, so in our case it was production. Oh, sorry. We have to give dash and yep. So now if you want to delete a pod from the production namespace, so we'll use the same command kubectl delete pod, the pod name. Yeah. Now if I'm not specifying the namespace, it will just complain that pod doesn't exist in the default namespace. Yeah. So that's why we have to provide the namespace here. So dash n production. So now it will go into it will check whether that pod exists in the production namespace, and it will try to delete uh, the pod. So here we go. So the nginx pod is deleted. So let's go and quickly see the pods in the production namespace, and there are no resources available in this namespace. Now let's see how to delete if you want to delete all the pods. So currently we deleted only a single pod where we provided the pod name. If you want to delete all pods within any given namespace, um, then um, how to delete it? Yeah. So we have currently have only one pod. In the default namespace. So let's quickly create another pod within the default namespace. Nginx. Yep. So now we see that we have two pods. Yep. Within the default namespace. Now, if you want to delete all the pods within the default namespace, then use kubectl delete dash all pods command. Yeah, and this should delete all the pods. Now, if you want to delete it from your custom namespace, then you can use the dash n again, the same dash n and the namespace name. Yeah, but now we want to delete it from the default namespace. So kubectl delete dash all uh, double dash all pods. Yeah. So you see here nginx1 and nginx pod YAML. So these pods, two pods are deleted, and there are no pods currently available in the default namespace. I think that's all I have for this video. Um, I hope you like this video and keep watching the other videos on the Kubernetes. Thank you.